So thank you very much for joining us. We've got about 3/4 of an hour, and I'm hoping what we can do is give a little bit more of an overview of sort of where we are now and what needs to be done following Simon's introduction. But as well as hearing about what's going on in your different organisations, it'll be helpful as your leaders in the aerospace tech ecosystem to build a picture of the new innovations that we've got going on, changes already taking place, and what are the priorities going forwards, and as has been mentioned already by Gary, what is the role that all of us can play in that. So what I'm planning to do is to hear individually from each of the panelists. I'll ask a question, and then we'll be taking the questions that have come through from Slido. So let's start by just getting everybody's perspective. So Matt first, you're billed as Chair of Sustainable Aviation, but you've got a day job as well, haven't you?
I have.
That's Carbon Strategy Director for Heathrow.
Correct.
And you've also represented Heathrow on several groups focusing on aviation sustainability and climate change. So what's your take on the challenge of net zero aviation?
Well, thanks, Kate, and great to be here today. So, as Kate says, I'm representing sustainable aviation. I work at Heathrow, so happy to explore the airport's piece of it. And it's great to be with ATI, actually, because although, as you say, we're part of the same ecosystem, probably I've had relatively less contact with ATI until we set up the Jet Zero Council with government and got more involved. So great to be here talking to you. Three overall messages. I mean, what's my take overall? Firstly, that it's hugely exciting. We can take the carbon out of aviation. We have to, but it's a hugely motivating agenda. Secondly, it's now really all about delivery at pace, and that came through from our introductory comments as well. But thirdly, we can't do it on our own. We do need the right frameworks, market signals from government as well. So if I just explore those a bit, and starting with the excitement, I was talking to a colleague from Airbus a while ago who was talking about Keir Starmer's visit to the Airbus site in Filton in Bristol, where he was meeting, I think it was a young engineer who was working on the zero carbon emissions flight. And he felt the real excitement from that person, motivated by what they were doing, but was also I think genuinely engaged to learn that we can take the carbon out of flying. And the reason I mention that point is that's not taken as a given by many of our stakeholders, actually. There's many, certainly in the UK, who'd argue, well, we can't take the carbon out of flying. The solution is to reduce or even take the carbon out, take the flying out of society instead. So I think really important to focus on how we can do this. And we can be really proud the UK's taken a real lead in this as well. We heard about the commitments by the UK and global sector to decarbonise. I was thinking back to 2019, which was the year a number of UK aviation players were making commitments to net zero. And talking to global colleagues at that stage, some of them would be saying, wow, yeah, it's really going to be really tough getting to net zero. At that stage, globally, we had a 50% cut in net emissions as our goal. They were saying, even that's difficult enough. And even if we do it, we'll never get governments on board. And here we are 3 years later. The whole global sector's committed, and global governments have set that goal of net zero as well, which is brilliant. But if we can take the carbon out of flying, which is my first point, we've got to now focus on delivery at pace, which came through from Gary and Simon's comments as well. And I think you'll hear a lot of consensus, actually, about the 4 key steps that will allow us to take the carbon out of flying. A quick recap. It's about using less fuel by being more efficient. That's always going to make sense. Simon's talked about some of the technologies there. It's about then, but efficiency alone won't get us to net zero. So it's about 2 further steps, changing the fuel and changing the plane. Changing the fuel is about scaling up the proven solution of sustainable aviation fuel. Really important because we can drop it into today's aircraft and engines so that as soon as we produce this, we can start to cut emissions. And it's also the only currently, and I stress currently, proven solution for mid and long haul journeys, at least by 2050, which are around 70% of emissions from our sector globally. But we also need to look at changing the plane, and that's investing in R&D and development of zero carbon emission technology. Hugely exciting. And we've heard from Simon some of the timescales and ranges and sizes of those different aircraft. Really a really critical piece. And then finally, anything that's left, we need to remove. So operate efficiently, change the fuel, change the plane, and remove anything that's left. But the really good news is there's a recipe that will allow us to take the carbon out. No single silver bullet. We will need all of those. So just my final point, what do we need from government? There already is huge commitment in the sector, huge investment flowing. On aerospace, brilliant in the UK to see the funding for ATI over the next 3 years. We need that to be extended out to 2030. On sustainable aviation fuel, critical government role. There are really 3 legs of the stool that we need, and I would say 2 of those are wobbly and 1 is missing at the moment. We need a mandate at 10% sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. The government's committed to that. We've got to get the legislation through to actually send that signal to the market. We need grants and loan guarantees. The government has announced those. Actually, that's probably more than wobbly, less wobbly. I'll give that a firm leg of the stool. But we also need price incentives, a contract for difference mechanism that's been so effective in scaling up offshore wind. And at the moment, the government is consulting and talking hard on that, but we need that to translate to a firm policy signal. And all of us will need hydrogen, whether it's for SAF as an ingredient for synthetic fuel, whether it's as a fuel in its own right. So we need government to factor aviation into the hydrogen supply plans for the UK.
Thank you very much indeed, Matt. That was very comprehensive. I feel like saying to the others, follow that. No, it's great. What we're meant to be doing is setting a context, and you've done exactly that for us. That's wonderful. Russ, on to you. Now, at GKN, your roles have encompassed technology, quality, business strategy, and corporate affairs. Now, you're Chief Technology Officer, and you've also taken responsibility for sustainability at GKN Aerospace. And you're chair of the UK ADS Sustainable Aerospace Board, so fingers in pies there. So,
I've handed over to Alan Newby.
Oh, right. Oh, I haven't got the up-to-date information. Yeah. What are your thoughts? Like, what's your perspective, and what perhaps would you like to add to what's already been said?
I mean, I guess the most obvious first perspective is how aligned we are in terms of what the overall roadmap looks like. And I think probably if anyone on the panel was to give as good an answer as Matt, we'd include exactly the same ingredients. So, and that I think is in a huge part to down to the ATI and AGP and other forums that bring us together, because we've actually spent quite a lot of time over the last few years really debating and discussing and agreeing and creating a coherent narrative for aerospace. And it's not just a narrative, it's genuinely what we think is needed in order to achieve the route to net zero. So firstly, fantastic answer, can't disagree with anything that Matt said. Probably the only thing I will add on to it is we also need to recognise that for aviation, carbon dioxide is only a part of the impact on the environment. So for aviation, and different studies show different numbers, but roughly a third between carbon dioxide, NOx, and contrails. And some recent studies show contrails potentially being even a more significant part. So when we're looking at the decarbonisation of aviation, we also need to consider those other factors, because what we're really after is making aviation sustainable. Now, in terms of the non-carbon dioxide impacts of aviation, one of the things we need to think about is, A, do we have enough information to make informed decisions? And then secondly, what can we do about it? And I think one of the questions you've got on your agenda, I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. But that's clearly something which we're quite focused on, is the broader impact of aviation on the environment.
Thank you, Russ. Now on to Claire. Now you're Vice President Fuel Management for Airbus Commercial Aircraft. Wealth of engineering experience. You started there as a graduate, so she's been through the system. You've got teams working on SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, and the development of zero emissions aircraft. And you're also a member of the Jet Zero Council's. I've got to read this right. Jet Zero Council Zero Emissions Vehicle Delivery Group.
Correct.
Yep.
It's catchy.
So your perspective.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Kate, and good morning, everybody. Like the other panel members, clearly pleased to be here. And yeah, I have been at Airbus 25 years, and never have I been part of such an aligned common goal and common vision. And the last 3 years has really accelerated that. So, I'm personally proud to be, the Vice President of Fuel Management. But what does that actually mean? It means I'm responsible, and my teams are responsible for the research and technology, R&D, the new development, the certification and the in-service support of all of the commercial aircraft fuel systems and inerting systems across the fleet. So fantastic time to be in that role, but what does that really mean? In 25 years, multiple pathways, we all know it, no single bullet. So I'm proud to say within Airbus, we've got the XLR, the A321XLR, new generation of single-aisle aircraft, 3 flight test aircraft currently performing flight test, 30% reduced fuel burn and reduced CO2 compared to the previous generation of the single-aisle aircraft. Step 1 on a pathway, efficiency is really key. Obviously able to fly up to 4,800 nautical miles. So really changing the way we fly long haul on a single aisle aircraft. So, you know, product policy is a big part of the journey. Yes, I have teams working on the certification of all of our products on 100% sustainable aviation fuel. This year alone, we have flight tests being performed on the single-aisle aircraft, the 350 aircraft, the 380 aircraft, and soon to be the A330 aircraft. So we really are pushing SAF onto all of our platforms. On all of those flight tests, we are using a DLR aircraft chase plane to actually sample the contrails to really maximise and understand the benefit to the climate. This isn't a tick box exercise. This is about creating value and really understanding the impact of the 100% sustainable aviation fuel on the climate. And then Zero E. Obviously, you will have seen that Airbus has announced a Zero E program. I'm proud to say, you know, my team are an integral part of driving the technology development for what will be true zero CO2 product, with the view that we enter into service with a product in 2035. Hugely exciting. Obviously, we can't do it on our own. So today is all around discussing partnerships and collaboration. But you know, that's my context, and I'm excited to hear the conversations of today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. So moving on to Jahan. Now, actually, you previously worked at Airbus, I gather, in various technical engineering roles. And at Spirit AeroSystems, you've headed up the new Aerospace Innovation Centre, which supported the company's technology capability while also providing open access facilities for SMEs and larger businesses. And in March, you were promoted to Director of Research and Technology at Spirit AeroSystems Europe and established a product sustainability team to look at enablers for hydrogen and electric-powered flight. So the floor is yours.
Perfect. Firstly, thank you to the ATI for having me on this panel. It's a privilege to join the rest of the panel members. So if I share what my view is from a net zero perspective, and that's really shaped what we're doing at Spirit as well. The way I look at net zero, it's in 4 different segments. So we've got the design of a component, the manufacturing route, in-service performance, and then end-of-life and recyclability of a component. So one of the elements that I stress to my team is that the decisions that we make at the very start of the design process, so right at the PDR, really lock in the amount of emissions that product will have right the way through its life. So if we go down a carbon fibre component versus a metallic component, it dictates which path it will take from a manufacturing perspective. We actually design for cost, performance, and manufacturability right up front. So that actually is when we decide whether we'll go and make a component in the Far East versus the UK as well. So if we can automate, we'll bring it to the UK. That has an impact on its carbon footprint through transport. So really, those decisions at design will really influence what we do throughout the rest of those 3 segments after that. From a manufacturing perspective, I'm always looking at how can we go and reduce the amount of carbon emissions that we have during the manufacturing process. So how can we move to more efficient methods? How can we power our factories differently as well? So that's something that we are actively pushing so that we can look at our own 4 walls and understand how can we improve and reduce our carbon footprint. And then how can we transport components more effectively? So what we're trying to do is how do we closely couple supply chains to the manufacturing facilities, so we're not having to go and ship things all across the world. The next element is in-service performance. So this is where I always look at it as use less fuel, use a better fuel. So if we go for a carbon component and that's generally lighter, that benefit stays with that aircraft for the next 20 or 30 years. So how do we really understand what the impact is of having a lightweight structure? And then we're looking at drag improvements as well. So how can we find laminar flow technologies that will go and benefit the aircraft? And again, that is something that stays with the aircraft on every single flight. I won't touch on electrification and hydrogen. That is a focus of ours, but we'll hear a lot about that as the days progress. But that will be the big game changer. But there is a lot more that we can do just now. And then at the end of life, so what do we do with these aircraft? So after 20 or 30 years. So the decisions that we made at the very early in the design phase will dictate what happens after 20 or 30 years. But at the same time, we have offcuts, we have consumables that we use during the manufacturing process. What are we doing with those? So how can we recycle those? Firstly, can we reduce the amount of offcuts? Then can we repurpose them so that we can use them within our own products? And then thirdly, can we go and use them in different industries as well? So how do we minimize what goes into landfill? That's really how we look at it from a circularity perspective.
Thank you very much indeed, thank you. And we've also got Simon on the team. As I've given a bit of biographical information about the others, I'm just going to mention that you spent most of your professional career at Rolls-Royce, but most recently the head of Aerospace R&T. But you're also a visiting professor of engineering science at the University of Oxford, and as CTO at ATI, you're a key influencer in the UK's technology strategy. Is there anything else you'd like to add at this stage from what's been raised? Do you have another perspective you'd like to put on? A hat change?
I think it comes back to the ATI program. We talked about it is getting more and more competitive. Now the ATI funding scene. Actually, in the last spending review, we ended up with more money, but that's rapidly getting taken up by the level of ambition of people, and we're having to make some very hard choices. And interestingly, really those choices are coming down to two key things. Sustainability. We're making hard decisions on projects now, whether or not we can fund them. And sustainability is a key part of that decision. And economic benefit as well. What will the downstream economic benefit be? And as we've all seen, it's a hugely competitive world. UK industry, to stay in the game, has to be invest in the latest technology, and particularly in manufacturing. As Jahan said, automation is absolutely vital to get the cost base there so that we can compete in these global markets. And that competition is ever more intense. Particularly as we emerge from the COVID times and look forward from that. We're obviously happy to support that. And it's been great, over my time in the ATI, to see the level of change in the industry. And just in the last, 3 years since the last conference, talk of hydrogen was just starting. And now everyone's talking about it in 3 years. So just an unbelievable pace of change, I think, comes home. Yeah.
Thank you, Simon. So, I've just got another question for you each before we go to the slide. I see there are questions coming in. Please do look and upvote ones that you would like to be asked. Matt, actually, I'm going to pick up on something that you said. Your fourth point that you said was remove the rest. What is the rest that we're removing?
Any carbon that's left after we've become as efficient as we can, switched to sustainable fuels, and developed hydrogen technology. So, and there are some projections globally which would say we can get very close to absolute zero. I think the consensus is that even by 2050, and that's the number we're all aiming at, net zero by 2050, there's still going to be some carbon from aviation. So it's about sucking it out of the atmosphere and burying it at that stage.
Thank you. Now, I just wanted to know, there are many views about how we hit net zero. You have said there's no silver bullet. Is it actually helpful that there are lots of different views, because that means that we can try lots of different things?
I think, how many different views are there? I think what you've heard from the panel, and my view actually, is that there's a pretty clear consensus on the ingredients, the four things that we've talked about: efficiencies, sustainable fuel, zero emission flight, particularly hydrogen, but electric for shorter journeys, and carbon removal, those 4 steps. The exact mix of those, I don't think anyone could predict with absolute certainty now, but there's good alignment around the broad steps. and I think good alignment around what we as an industry need to do, but also where we need action from government as well. And that's a critical step here. So I think, actually, I think having a range of different views shows that everyone from ICAO globally, and ATAG, the Air Transport Action Group that brings together all of our sector globally, through different companies at a European or national level, different governments around the world, they're all engaged on and mapping a path to net zero aviation. But it's, I would say, actually, although there's a number of roadmaps, the core of those is pretty consistent, actually.
Thank you. Russ, we've just heard from Matt about the importance of getting governments to act immediately. What can aerospace do to have a more immediate positive impact?
I mean, the obvious thing is some of the things we're talking about are going to take some time. So whether it's the creation of SAF through infrastructure, whether it's the generation of hydrogen, the infrastructure around hydrogen, development of technologies and aircraft and engine solutions that are going to enable that route. So all of those things are we're going to have to do now in order for them to have the earliest possible impact. In addition to those, though, there are some things that we can also be doing right now. And I guess I categorize those in two different ways. One is about helping people and also companies to make informed choices about how to have less impact on the environment. And the second is enabling the most positive, sustainable choice to also be economically viable. Because if it's always the most financially attractive option is the most damaging to the environment, that's not sustainable in the long term, because ultimately businesses have to thrive. And I mentioned I'd take an example of this. I was fortunate enough about 5-6 weeks ago to go to the ICAS conference over in Sweden, and sat on an afternoon through a series of presentations by DLR. And there were some really important ingredients in there that I thought were just fascinating and really, really important for our industry. In particular, coming back to my point about non-carbon emissions and contrails, and their data sort of showed up to 50% of the impact of aviation could be related to contrails. But what they also did is they showed the results of 5 years of data and analysis to look at how those contrails were affecting the environment. And what they showed is all flights are not equal. And they showed that, what they showed was that different flights at different times of day, at different altitudes, have a significantly varying impact on the extent to which they have a negative or even positive impact on radiative forcing and hence global warming. So just one particular number that stuck with me, 80% of the negative impact of contrails came from only 12% of flights. So if you think about contrails being potentially up to 50% of the negative impact of aviation, and 80% of that comes from 12% of flights, very quickly you can start to come to a conclusion that says, there are some things we can do right now, actually, if we have the right data to help inform and guide airlines, aviation, to make more sustainable choices in how they fly, as long as the economic conditions for them to do so don't put them at a disadvantage competitively to the others in the industry. So that's just one example of how I think we can make more immediate impacts into aviation. I guess my ambition, if I start getting really excited about this stuff, we're working on things like hydrogen electric propulsion. My vision for that is that it's not just a force of getting down to net zero. We could actually be in a position where using hydrogen electric, which doesn't have any carbon dioxide and doesn't have any NOx at all, and does have the opportunity to decide how to produce water vapor or contrails out of the aircraft, my vision would be, actually, flight could have a positive impact on the environment. You could actually decide consciously how and when to fly at what altitude to emit your vapor in a way that only contributes positively. And so actually aviation becomes a net positive contributor rather than a net negative contributor. That's where I think ultimately I'd like to get to.
This is absolutely fascinating. I will just say, I feel I'd like to go and find out more about the data, because my question is, which ones? Where do we go to find this information?
So DLR have published their data on the website. Cranfield University recently hosted an event with a whole number of people in this room probably, where we were looking at a lot of that data. I think we're starting to build our understanding around the data. I guess my challenge is there's enough there that's saying there's some important stuff and decisions we're going to need to make. Yes, more data is going to be needed, but the signs are there that there's action to take.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. Now, I just want to talk about supply chains, because it's all very well being here as Airbus, but you are so dependent on your supply chain. So what does Airbus need from the supply chain in the UK to get, I'm being specific here, to get a zero carbon emission narrow-body flying in the 2030s?
Okay, thank you. I've said it before and I'll say it many times today. I'm sure collaboration and partnerships is key. But if I be more specific, so if you take SAF, for example, there isn't enough SAF produced in the UK today, 100% SAF, to even operate our flight test programme. There's a new plant being built in the northwest of England. It's a huge plant. They're investing in it themselves, but it will only have enough 100% SAF to serve 10% of the flights out of Manchester Airport. That's a scale of where we're, the distance and the challenge and the obstacle that we overcome. I'm referring to the famous chart that we all see, that contribution of SAF in the big blue section cannot be ignored. XLR goes into service in March 24, thereabouts. It'll be flying on 100% SAF in 20 years, with 30% less SAF requirement than the previous generation of a single-aisle aircraft. But we can't ignore that. So we can't ignore the missing production in the UK or globally at all. So that's mainly my SAF story. The certification of the products will happen. That's not the complex part. Having the infrastructure for producers, distributors and airports is the challenging part. If you then bring that forward to hydrogen, you know, where the fuel system and engine system starts and stops on a hydrogen aircraft is going to be different than a classical aircraft. We need to understand the refuel infrastructure. We need to understand the production. We need to understand the safe storage and handling. We need to work with non-aerospace sectors that have equipment and, you know, experience in space programs, for example. And we need to not be an arrogant sector to not listen to other knowledge and experience and form those partnerships that may help us move forward and accelerate. But with those partnerships, they have to be smart, they have to be value added, they have to secure the funding in the right way, to spend on the right things at the right time, to learn, to test, to do some outer cycle development, because what I have personally learned in 3 years of working on hydrogen is exponential, and I expect the next 3 years to be exponential. So we also need a group of partnerships and collaborations that will adapt as we learn and not carry around an ego that it wasn't their idea. You know, at the end of the day, this is a global challenge with really ambitious targets, and not achieving them isn't an option. If you just take something as simple as a fuel pump or a valve or, you know, a sensor, they're all different for what will be on a zero-E product. It's 100% different. And coupled with all of that, we need the skills and the competencies to be developed alongside that. So we need academia to be working with us. We need EASA and the CAA to be driving policy that is, you know, a global standard. And there's an awful lot to do. Certainly none of us on this panel can do it on our own in our organisations. So I would say really that's where we need in the supplier. And don't be afraid if you're a smaller, you know, non-classical aerospace supplier to approach some of the big industrial partners, because we're looking for experience and we're looking for people to take a bit of risk with us to gain learning and move forward on these new technologies.
You mentioned that the global issue here. Jahan, it's a multinational company that you're with. So how do they view the UK aerospace industry at the moment?
So if I look back 5 years ago when I started at Spirit, the work that we did in the UK was largely built to print. We had one program, the A350 program, which was a design and build. At that point, we triggered a redesign of a component, and that was actually supported by the ATI to go and de-risk technology development, and we redesigned the component from the ground up, which was the RTM spoilers project. What that showed my bosses, for want of a better word, in the US, was that through government funding in the ATI and through Scottish Enterprise and the Scottish Government, we were able to put a very compelling business case together to really de-risk technology development and then actually improve our business cases to bring work that we actually had in the Far East, in Malaysia, at one of our sites, back to the UK. So we created 100 jobs through this support of our funding bodies. Now, what that triggered was our Research and Innovation Centre, the AIC, to be launched off the back of that. And really driving that the UK is where we can go and leverage the catapult network, the funding bodies, to go and push forward from an automation perspective, Industry 4.0 perspective, and now, very importantly, the sustainability agenda as well. Now, the Fly Zero project that the UK launched, what that did was it showed our business in the US that the centre of gravity towards zero emissions and net zero is in the UK and in Europe. And as a result, they've actually endorsed me to set up this product sustainability team. So there's been quite a seismic shift within our business in terms of setting up research centres and actually investing in the UK to go and enable it to go and achieve our net zero targets. In addition to that, we also purchased the Belfast site, just really cementing our commitment to the UK. So there's been a massive change in the past 5 years, and we do see the support from the funding bodies, the catapult networks, the extremely strong university network, and then the drive towards net zero in the UK as being key and centred out of the UK.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the sense of excitement that I'm catching from all of you. Yes, it's a challenge, but things are really exciting. Simon, if it's okay, I'm going to go to the SIDO questions because there's something coming through here. What is the ATI doing to help accelerate the infrastructure development required to deliver SAF and hydrogen fuels?
Wondered if this one might come up. Yeah, in fact, this is one of our key directions following on from Fly Zero. Is we looked at if we're going to do something, and it's quite interesting. I've already said we've got major projects already coming through from many of our stakeholders out there for hydrogen. But what's lacking is infrastructure for hydrogen. And today, if you wanted, let alone green hydrogen, if you wanted just liquid hydrogen, it's not made in the UK. It's not produced in the UK. So if we're going to start to develop systems, fuel systems, propulsion systems and so on that are fueled using liquid hydrogen, we need the infrastructure to make green hydrogen and to turn that into liquid hydrogen in the UK, so that we can start to develop experimental systems, prototype them, demonstrate them, and get them flying. And so that's for us one of the key next steps. We've been convening together a big group of people, seeking ideas, trying to get a picture of what's required, the scale of investment that's needed. And so that's something we're going to be sort of urgently taking forward in the months to come, because that needs to happen very quickly. And I'd say in connection with that, the other sort of key priority for us is the climate science, and we talked about that. It's absolutely key that we get that better understanding of the climate. And again, that's something that we feel from the ATI perspective we can catalyse, in addition to all the stuff we do on the big industrial projects coming through. In addition to
you're talking about I get the impression it's being talked about. Can you give a sense to the delegates of where you expect to get and when with this?
Yeah, well, I'd very much want to see in the next few months that we've launched the first phase, if you like, the initial design phase for the infrastructure, because we have a rough idea of what it might look like and how much of it we might need. But you need to start to put some detail into that before then at that stage you've got a design, if you like, of your initial plant that you're going to manufacture, so that you have an idea of the cost and then a precise idea of how long it's going to take. But it could take, and that project would be 6 to 12 months, and then you'd be looking probably a couple of years or so to get all the capital investment done to put the equipment in place to do that. So you're looking at about a 3-year timescale from here.
Matt,
to get that.
would you
Well,
like
just
something?
one really quick build. I think there's a really important role for government in this as well. So Claire and I were both at you mentioned the Jet Zero Council Zero Emission Flight Delivery Group, that long acronym earlier, where we had a presentation from one of the leads on hydrogen strategy at the business department in government. And there is a UK hydrogen strategy. It's a reasonably comprehensive one. Has it adequately considered aviation's needs in future? I'm not sure. It was published before the government's Jet Zero strategy, which looked at the role of hydrogen for aircraft, power to liquid fuels. Now, the Transport Department and the Business Department are talking, but I think it's really important that the government is adequately thinking as it looks at a national level, because we need hydrogen for lots of things. What's aviation going to need, and are we making sure that that infrastructure and supply is there?
And just to complement, if I may, a very recent example, because there's not enough hydrogen in the UK at all. And we thought we'd secured some for test purposes. And at the very last minute, another sector, Glassworks, took that hydrogen and they've used it. So this supply and demand and the cost model,
Which then brings in the
absolutely-
cost, which makes it, which is something we've talked about. It's not just making informed decisions, it's them having economic viability as well.
But we're competing multi-sector, and we need to recognise that and face that with reality.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, we had exactly the same challenge. We had a program also supported by the ATI through the Safe Flight initiative to create a small liquid hydrogen fuel cell test. And for that, we actually ended up having to work with a partner company, Filton Systems Engineering, to put in place a liquefaction at the location where we were doing the test, because we just simply couldn't get liquid hydrogen purchased in anything other than tankers full at millions of dollars. So yeah, I think absolutely this is going to be one of the key issues over the next period.
Now, I'm aware we don't have very much time, so I'm actually going to leap on something slightly different here. How do UK-established aerospace companies see startups, and how will you collaborate to accelerate technologies without crushing them? That's what it says on here. Somebody wrote it. So who would like to, yeah.
I'm happy to take that one. So for any SMEs or startups, we'd encourage them to come and join us at our Aerospace Innovation Centre. We don't charge any membership fees. The pure objective of the AIC is to work together with these companies, align our roadmaps with theirs, and try and hit a common goal. I'm always quite wary of the IP discussions and crushing them. So we commit to the Scottish enterprise that helped us fund that facility, that we will have extremely fair IP terms. What is their background remains their background IP. We will go and work with them and develop it, but the AIC will give them a platform to go and try their technologies, go and develop their technologies with a view of becoming our supply chain of the future. So that's where we're really driving our Aerospace Innovation Centre. If any of the startups want to find out more, a few of my team are in the crowd as well, come approach me, come approach the team, and we can give you a bit more information of how you can work with us.
And if I may just add, I think the advantage we see in startups is their ability to act a bit more quickly than some of our larger organisations that are sat on the stage today. There's good opportunities to explore different experience, different maturity, and be able to work together to fail fast, test early, do out-of-cycle development. I won't name them here, but we have 2 examples of that working with me on the back of people I've met at things like the Farnborough Air Show and the FAC conference are now working with us on the Zero E programme. So, we do have success stories of taking a smaller company in the UK and working with the larger industrial.
Can I just add one more thing? So from a GK Aerospace point of view, we've now been working on something called the Accelerator Programme for a number of years. Initially started actually with the ATI, with Boeing, but we've also followed that through with Boeing itself. And that whole programme is about enabling SMEs or startups to identify opportunities, to put their ideas forward, and then to gain direct feedback from companies like us on how they can best tune and align and structure their organisations and their work and what they need to focus on. And I think our proven track record over the last 3 years is that those relationships have enabled them, and they've also helped us to become a bit more innovative, to get new ideas as well. So I guess our proven track record is we are working really well with startups, to help foster and support them in their journey.
And you're not crushing.
I'm 100% not crushing, I don't believe.
I wonder if somebody's speaking from personal experience here. It does seem a bit... Okay, wonderful answers, very positive responses there. I'm looking, we haven't got very much time, but I wanted to pick up on something that's related to collaboration here. Is the aviation sector coordinated enough in its efforts to net zero? Are hydrogen and SAF competing rather than focusing on where they can have the best efforts? And I'm going to link that to another question you can probably see up here about Fly Zero. Is there a risk that the recommendations from Fly Zero will be forgotten? Is it good to hear about the focus on True Zero, but UltraFan has dominated the budget? So this sort of thing about how are we coordinating focus as well as efforts? Simon's going to start.
Well, yeah, let me jump in there. I think, as I said earlier, we're in a, with all these things, there's not a switch. We're in a transition. We're transitioning from fossil fuel energy to green forms of energy. You can't do it overnight. There's a transition. And there's a transition going on in the ATI program today. We're transitioning from what I call the ultra-efficient aircraft technologies that are going to go into aircraft in the nearer term. And we're transitioning to novel forms of energy for propulsion and aircraft that are going to look different from the ones today. And, what you can see now in the recent projects coming through, in the last sort of 6 months or so, there's a rapid increase in projects that are pushing ahead on hydrogen propulsion. So we're in a transition, and again, it's wrong to sort of maybe switch stuff off and start other stuff. We've got to finish what we've already started, because those technologies, we talked about the UltraFan, Wing of Tomorrow. Well, some of those concepts, they're going to be fueled on hydrogen. You can put the hydrogen into an UltraFan. Ultimately, if you want long-range flight with hydrogen, that's what you're going to use, because all of the simulations, all of the engineering we've done show that for longer ranges, it'll probably be hydrogen-powered jet engines that will be the most effective way of propelling yourself. For shorter ranges, fuel cells maybe. So there's a mixture there. So you can't choose one or the other. You've got to sort of adopt a fairly broad way of going forward.
I'm interested you're using the word transition. I sense that it would be nice to have something to hold on to and say, yes, this is the roadmap, off we go. Yeah. But actually, in a year's time, we don't know how things will have changed.
Yeah. The other part of that question was, well, are you forgetting the recommendations of Fly Zero? And it's like, no, because we've built the strategy. When we published the strategy in April, that was after and just after Fly Zero finished. So the recommendations have gone directly into the strategy, and that's what we're following today.
Could I just add to that as well? So we had, as a number of companies, we had quite a few of our employees seconded into the Fly Zero project. Yeah. We've kept all those employees together, and that's what's created our product sustainability team. And we're actively using the roadmaps that were created from the Fly Zero project to go and trigger our follow-on projects. So absolutely, we're using the work that was done in Fly Zero. They've highlighted the gaps, and that's what we're trying to plug. So I don't think we're at risk of forgetting the great work that was done by any stretch of the imagination.
I see we're running out of time. Brief comments from Russ?
So I guess my boss used to say you have to be able to walk and chew gum. And the reality is we can't, I'm hugely hydrogen focused in terms of my sort of ambitions. But we also need to recognise if we wait for another decade for when those aircraft will start to come through, by that stage we'll have 30,000 aircraft sat on runways not being able to fly on anything other than hydrocarbons. So we need SAF. It's an important ingredient in the journey, but we have to also invest in where ultimately we need to go, which is going to be hydrogen.
Thank you. There are lots of nodding from Matt. Would you like to give us a final comment?
I think it's, the question said, are we coordinated enough? I hope what people have heard today is a really strong alignment actually across the sector there was a question about SAF and hydrogen. It's a both and, not an either or. exactly as Russ said, we've got to, I mean, I suppose my final point would be, climate emergency has become quite a hackneyed phrase, but it is an emergency, we're seeing that. So that means we've got to move quickly, we've got to scale up known solutions now, big focus on SAF now, because we will face a growing crisis of legitimacy as a sector if we're not visibly starting to take carbon out. But we've also, walking and chewing gum, got to focus on the next stage as well and see how far can we push hydrogen. So.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you very much indeed to our panel. Let's say thank you to Matt, Russ, Claire, Jahan and Simon. Thank you.